The Caribbean has long been a flashpoint for U.S.-Venezuela tensions, with U.S. submarines patrolling to protect oil interests, while Venezuela responds with bold naval actions. Undersea confrontations often spark controversy, leading to unexpected escalations. In 2025, a U.S. submarine surfacing dangerously close to Venezuela's coast ignited a fierce confrontation, shaking the region and shocking the world. Below is the account of this clash, from a daring undersea maneuver to an unforeseen outcome that stunned everyone. On a stormy evening in 2025, the U.S. Navy submarine USS Virginia surfaced just a few hundred meters off Venezuela's coast, its radar sweeping for threats. A nearby Venezuelan patrol vessel detected it, broadcasting urgent demands for the submarine to withdraw. The Virginia held its position, searchlights piercing the rain. Tension crackled as Venezuelan sailors aimed weapons. Suddenly, the Venezuelan vessel fired an anti-submarine missile, the projectile streaking through the air and striking the Virginia's hull, triggering a massive explosion that rocked the deck and sent a towering water column skyward. Alarms blared, black smoke billowed, transforming the Caribbean into a powder keg, ready to erupt with devastating force. The attack sparked a ferocious U.S. response. F-18 jets from a nearby U.S. carrier roared in, engaging Venezuelan fighter jets in a whirlwind dogfight over the Caribbean sky. Missiles streaked through the air, a Venezuela jet exploding in a brilliant fireball that lit the horizon. The Virginia launched cruise missiles, tearing through the Venezuelan vessel's deck in a sprawling blaze. Venezuela retaliated with anti-ship missiles, one striking a U.S. escort ship, sending water and metal skyward. Smoke and flames spread, relentless explosions churning the sea, turning the Caribbean into a chaotic war zone where every wave carried death. The conflict surged into space with terrifying speed. Venezuela used jamming satellites to disrupt U.S. aircraft control systems. The U.S. countered with anti-satellite weapons, destroying a Venezuelan satellite, sending orbital debris cascading like a meteor shower. In the skies, combat drones from both sides clashed, bursting into fireballs that illuminated the night. Venezuelan hypersonic missiles targeted U.S. ships, but U.S. laser defense systems shot them down in dazzling beams of light. The war expanded as allies joined, turning the Caribbean into a multinational flashpoint where missiles and black smoke shrouded everything. The standoff drew in regional forces as Cuban and Nicaraguan ships rushed to support Venezuela, guns blazing in a multinational melee. U.S. destroyers arrived, their Tomahawk missiles obliterating Venezuelan coastal batteries in earth-shaking blasts. A Venezuelan submarine surfaced, launching torpedoes that rocked a U.S. frigate, debris flying in the blast. Coast Guard teams boarded Venezuelan vessels, engaging in brutal hand-to-hand combat on pitching decks. Flames spread as spilled oil ignited, engulfing coastal villages. Satellite imagery showed the Caribbean ablaze, marking a savage phase of warfare that engulfed the region. The attack's fallout triggered a global sanctions crisis as nations condemned Venezuela, imposing bans that crippled its economy. Oil exports halted, causing shortages that rocked global markets. An international coalition formed to enforce blockades, but Venezuela-backed hackers disrupted global banking, freezing assets in retaliation. Relief ships faced pirate attacks, with cargo looted in the chaos. The U.S. led a multinational effort to restore maritime security, but rogue factions emerged, blending state and criminal actions. The crisis paused major warfare, but a fractured economy and persistent threats signaled an unstable future. Tensions between the U.S. and Venezuela have simmered over oil disputes and military posturing in the Caribbean. U.S. Navy warships patrol to protect interests, while Venezuela bolsters forces to assert sovereignty. In 2025, a surprise Venezuelan attack on a U.S. warship sparked a ferocious conflict, leading to a chain of events that shocked the world. Below is the account of this confrontation, from a bold maritime assault to an outcome that left everyone reeling. At 2 p.m. on a sweltering afternoon in 2025, the Caribbean Sea near Venezuela's coast crackled with danger. A Venezuelan destroyer, armed with anti-ship missiles, suddenly charged toward the USS Ross, a U.S. Navy destroyer on patrol to monitor oil routes. The Venezuelan ship broadcast warnings, demanding the Ross leave what Caracas claimed as territorial waters. The Ross held course, radar sweeping relentlessly, the air electric. Without warning, the Venezuelan destroyer fired a missile, the warhead screaming into the Ross's hull, unleashing a massive explosion that rocked the deck and sent a towering water column skyward. Alarms wailed, black smoke billowed, turning the Caribbean into a powder keg ready to erupt with devastating force. The attack ignited an immediate U.S. response. FA-18 jets from a nearby U.S. carrier roared in, engaging Venezuelan fighters in a whirlwind dogfight over the Caribbean sky. Missiles streaked across the horizon, a Venezuelan jet exploding in a radiant fireball that lit the skyline. The Ross fired cruise missiles, ripping through the Venezuelan destroyer's deck, sparking fires that spread wildly. Venezuela countered with anti-ship missiles, one striking a U.S. escort ship, sending water and metal soaring. Smoke and flames consumed the sea, relentless blasts churning the waves, transforming the Caribbean into a chaotic war zone where every ripple carried death. The conflict surged into space with terrifying speed. Venezuela, backed by allies, used jamming satellites to disrupt U.S. aircraft control systems. The U.S. retaliated with anti-satellite weapons, obliterating a Venezuelan satellite, scattering orbital debris like a meteor shower. In the skies, combat drones from both sides clashed, bursting into fireballs that illuminated the night. Venezuelan hypersonic missiles targeted U.S. ships, but U.S. laser defenses incinerated them in blinding flashes. The war expanded as allies joined, turning the Caribbean into a multinational flashpoint where missiles and black smoke choked everything. Venezuela, supported by allied nations, launched ballistic missiles from land, targeting U.S. bases in Puerto Rico and Florida. The U.S. struck back with a lightning assault, using B-21 stealth bombers to destroy Venezuelan airfields near Caracas. Fires and smoke rose from flattened bases, sowing panic across the region. Other Caribbean nations were drawn to the brink, with Cuba and Nicaragua bolstering borders. The global economy reeled as oil prices skyrocketed, Gulf of Mexico shipping halted. Satellite imagery revealed massive fires and black smoke blanketing the region, marking an unprecedented phase of savage warfare in the Caribbean. The conflict's fallout triggered a regional refugee crisis. Destroyed infrastructure forced millions of Venezuelans to flee, flooding borders into Colombia and Brazil for safety. Refugee camps overflowed, diseases spreading in the chaos as international aid struggled to keep up. The U.S. and affected nations organized emergency relief, but insurgent groups seized lawless zones. Autonomous robots cleared contaminated areas, while international task forces hunted insurgents. The U.S. and Venezuela, facing humanitarian disaster, were forced into a temporary ceasefire, but new rebel factions emerged from the turmoil. The crisis paused the war, but swelling refugee flows and persistent disease threats signaled an unstable future. Drug ships in the Americas have become a major threat, carrying tons of cocaine and weapons through maritime routes. The U.S. Navy routinely patrols to intercept these vessels, but in 2025, a raid on a $7 billion drug ship uncovered horrifying contents, igniting a global narco-terror war. Below is the account of this incident, from a high seas interception to an outcome that stunned the world. On a moonless night in 2025, in the Indian Ocean near Somalia's coast, the U.S. Navy destroyer USS Decatur detected a $7 billion drug ship loaded with cocaine and suspicious cargo. Radar swept relentlessly, and the Decatur closed in, broadcasting demands to stop. The drug ship, armed with machine guns and RPGs, suddenly opened fire, bullets tearing into the Decatur's deck. Alarms wailed, U.S. sailors scrambled, and missiles from the destroyer screamed forward, sinking the drug ship in a massive explosion. Debris flew like a tempest, oil slicks ignited on the sea, turning the area into a fiery abyss. U.S. sailors boarded the wreck, bracing for what lay inside. As U.S. sailors boarded the sinking drug ship, they uncovered a chilling find. Beneath layers of cocaine were containers holding miniaturized nuclear weapons and guided missiles worth $7 billion, sourced from a terrorist network. A secondary explosion rocked the ship when a booby-trapped bomb detonated, forcing sailors to flee amid fire and smoke. Captives on board, forced laborers, cried for rescue in the chaos. The Navy called for backup, but the ship sank rapidly, dragging the weapons containers into the depths. Black smoke choked the sky, relentless blasts churning the sea, transforming the Indian Ocean into a chaotic war zone where every second pulsed with danger. The conflict surged into electronic terrorism warfare with terrifying speed. The terrorist network, alerted to the ship sinking, deployed hackers to attack U.S. command systems, leaking fleet positions. The U.S. retaliated by crippling terrorist servers in the Middle East, using AI-driven viruses to seize control. In the skies, terrorist drones swarmed U.S. ships, exploding in fireballs that illuminated the night. Missiles from terrorist bases targeted the U.S., but American laser defenses incinerated them in blinding flashes. The war expanded as allies joined, turning the Indian Ocean into a multi-layered flashpoint where digital and physical destruction fused in pandemonium. The terrorist network called for aid from rogue nations, triggering attacks on U.S. infrastructure in Africa and Asia. A massive explosion destroyed an oil pipeline in Nigeria, sparking fires that spread for miles. The U.S. Navy responded with lightning raids on terrorist training camps in Somalia, using guided missiles to obliterate targets from afar. The war spilled onto borders, with ferocious battles shaking coastal cities. The global economy reeled as oil prices skyrocketed, shipping routes halted. Satellite imagery revealed massive fires and black smoke blanketing the region, marking an unprecedented phase of savage warfare. The raid's fallout triggered a global terrorism crisis. With nuclear weapons lost, terrorist groups worldwide scrambled to claim them, sparking attacks in Europe and the US. Drug and arms prices soared, fueling crime waves. Nations urgently collaborated to hunt the missing weapons, with international special forces raiding hideouts. Autonomous robots cleared radioactive zones, while relief convoys faced kidnappings. The U.S. and affected nations formed anti-terrorism pacts, but chaos persisted, with small-scale nuclear detonations signaling a new era of global terrorism. The Caribbean has long been a hotspot for U.S.-Venezuela tensions, with Coast Guard patrols facing aggressive Venezuelan vessels over migration and smuggling routes. U.S. interdictions often spark disputes, while Venezuela asserts sovereignty with bold naval maneuvers. In 2025, a U.S. Coast Guard interception of a Venezuelan ship escalated into a fierce confrontation, reshaping regional dynamics and gripping the world in fear. Below is the account of this confrontation, from a high-seas standoff to an outcome that left everyone reeling. On a stormy dawn in 2025, the U.S. Coast Guard cutter USCGC James patrolled the Caribbean near Venezuelan waters, radar sweeping for smugglers. A Venezuelan naval frigate, laden with suspicious cargo, approached aggressively, broadcasting warnings to back off. The James held position, spotlights piercing the rain. The atmosphere crackled with electricity as Venezuelan sailors aimed weapons. Suddenly, the frigate rammed the James hull, metal screeching in the gale. Alarms blared, crews scrambled, and gunfire erupted amid the waves. The Caribbean turned into a powder keg, ready to erupt with devastating force. The ramming ignited immediate retaliation. U.S. helicopters from the cutter launched, hovering low as machine guns raked the Venezuelan frigate, sparks flying from hits. Venezuelan missiles streaked toward the James, one exploding nearby and sending a towering geyser skyward. The U.S. countered with harpoon missiles, ripping through the frigate's deck in a blazing fireball. Venezuelan speedboats swarmed in, lobbing RPGs that rocked the cutter. Coast Guard snipers picked off attackers, bodies tumbling into churning waters. The storm intensified, waves crashing over decks as explosions lit the night. Smoke and debris choked the sea, transforming the Caribbean into a chaotic war zone where every swell hid death. The conflict surged into electronic warfare with terrifying speed. Venezuela jammed the James radar with high-powered signals, blinding its defenses. The U.S. activated countermeasures, deploying decoy drones that confused Venezuelan missile locks. Cyber intrusions targeted the cutter's navigation, but onboard AI defenses repelled them, retaliating by hacking Venezuelan communications, sowing panic in their ranks. Drones from both sides clashed in mid-air bursts, their explosions illuminating the storm. Venezuela's allies scrambled jets, but U.S. F-35s from Puerto Rico joined, turning the skies into a high-tech nightmare where invisible waves and firepower fused in pandemonium. The standoff drew in regional forces as Cuban and Nicaraguan vessels rushed to aid Venezuela, their guns blazing in a multi-nation melee. U.S. destroyers arrived, their Tomahawk missiles slamming into Venezuelan coastal batteries, leveling them in thunderous blasts. Venezuelan submarines surfaced, launching torpedoes that rocked a U.S. frigate, debris flying amid exploding waves.
Coast Guard teams boarded Venezuelan ships, clashing in brutal hand-to-hand combat on pitching decks. The inferno spread as oil slicks caught fire, igniting nearby villages. Satellite imagery showed the Caribbean ablaze, marking a savage phase of warfare that engulfed the region. The attack's fallout triggered a global sanctions surge as nations condemned Venezuela, imposing crippling embargoes that starved its economy. Oil exports halted, causing shortages that rocked markets worldwide. International coalitions formed to enforce blockades, but Venezuelan-backed hackers disrupted global banking, freezing assets in retaliation. Relief ships faced pirate attacks, their cargoes looted amid chaos. The US and allies launched cyber operations to dismantle Venezuelan networks, but rogue factions rose, blending state aggression with criminal enterprise. The crisis paused major hostilities, but fractured economies and persistent threats signaled an unstable future.